world leaders gathered for the 2025 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit, an annual platform for regional cooperation and dialogue among Pacific Rim economies. On Friday, Chinese President Xi Jinping held back-to-back meetings with the Prime Ministers of Canada and Japan, signaling Beijing's intent to ease recent diplomatic tensions with both nations. The meetings marked one of the most closely watched developments of the summit, which has drawn leaders and representatives from more than 20 countries, including Chile, Mexico, and Peru. The host, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, welcomed the delegations at the Gyeongju International Conference Center, underscoring the city's historic role as a hub of cultural and economic exchange in East Asia. Xi Jinping's arrival at the venue was met with an orderly procession. Cameras captured the Chinese leader stepping out of his motorcade and greeting President Lee before entering the summit hall. The atmosphere was formal, with delegations maintaining a deliberate pace amid flashing cameras and quiet exchanges among aides. Moments later, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived, greeted by President Lee with a firm handshake. Carney, who assumed office earlier this year, has faced the challenge of recalibrating Canada's complex relationship with China, one strained by years of trade and diplomatic friction, rebuilding trust between Beijing and Ottawa. During the bilateral meeting, Xi Jinping emphasized the gradual stabilization of ties between the two countries, noting that after several difficult years, bilateral relations have shown signs of recovery. The remark, delivered during the closed-door discussion, but later confirmed by Chinese state media, reflects Beijing's cautious optimism toward repairing relations that have been severely tested since 2018. That year, Canada detained Meng Wanzhou, a senior executive at Chinese technology giant Huawei, following a U.S. extradition request. In apparent retaliation, Beijing detained two Canadian citizens, Michael Kovrig and Michael Sparvor, accusing them of espionage. Their release in 2021 paved the way for a limited diplomatic thaw, but economic relations have remained tense. Since taking office, Carney has sought to strike a balance between defending Canada's trade interests and engaging China in constructive dialogue. In July 2025, his government imposed an additional 25% tariff on Chinese steel imports, citing concerns about market flooding and unfair subsidies. In response, China introduced a temporary 75.8% tariff on North American canola, a key agricultural export for Canada's western provinces. The reciprocal measures highlighted the ongoing fragility of the trade relationship despite renewed talks. At the meeting, Xi extended an invitation to Carney to visit China, describing it as an opportunity to continue dialogue and explore areas of mutual benefit. The Canadian leader welcomed the offer, saying it represented a chance to continue the dialogue in a constructive way. For both sides, the talks in Gyeongju signaled a tentative step forward. While no new trade agreements were announced, diplomatic observers described the tone as markedly warmer than in previous years. APEC context: economic diplomacy amid rivalries. This year's APEC Summit in Gyeongju has placed renewed emphasis on stability and cooperation across the Asia-Pacific, a region navigating multiple layers of economic competition and political uncertainty. President Lee Jae-myung, in his opening remarks, called for pragmatic engagement among member states. He stressed that the Asia-Pacific region must prioritize mutual growth, not confrontation. Inside the summit hall, leaders from major economies, including the United States, Japan, China, and Canada, discussed issues ranging from digital trade to supply chain security and environmental resilience. The Gyeongju summit marks one of the last major multilateral gatherings before the close of 2025, setting the stage for potential breakthroughs in regional trade frameworks and tariff alignment. Xi Jinping's outreach to Japan. Following his meeting with Mark Carney, Xi Jinping held talks with Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi. The meeting was particularly symbolic, as Takaichi is Japan's first female Prime Minister and represents a conservative wing of Japanese politics traditionally cautious about relations with Beijing. Both leaders met briefly on the sidelines of the summit, with discussions focusing on regional economic stability, maritime cooperation, and the management of historical disputes that have long complicated Sino-Japanese ties. According to Japanese media, the conversation was cordial but cautious, emphasizing dialogue over confrontation. Xi's decision to meet Takaichi so early in her tenure was seen as an acknowledgement of Japan's crucial economic role in the region, as well as Beijing's interest in stabilizing one of its most important bilateral relationships. In recent years, the two countries have faced friction over maritime boundaries in the East China Sea, export controls on high-technology components, and Japan's decision to align more closely with US security policy in the Indo-Pacific. For Beijing, re-engaging with Tokyo serves a dual purpose. It provides an opportunity to reduce regional polarization and counterbalance growing strategic cooperation among Japan, the United States, and Australia under frameworks such as the Quad. During the APEC meeting, Xi reiterated that China remains committed to peaceful development and mutual respect, urging regional partners to resist bloc-based confrontation. Takaichi, for her part, expressed Japan's intention to maintain stable and constructive relations with China while reaffirming the importance of open and fair trade. The exchange marked a notable moment of diplomacy amid a broader landscape of strategic rivalry. The wider summit landscape beyond the bilateral meetings, the APEC Summit featured a full agenda of discussions on post-pandemic economic recovery, artificial intelligence regulation, and climate adaptation financing. In a session chaired by the South Korean host, participants debated approaches to restoring trust in global supply chains disrupted by trade restrictions and geopolitical tensions. Footage from the summit showed Xi Jinping, Mark Carney, and Sanae Takaichi seated among other world leaders, listening attentively as various heads of government outlined their priorities. The wide shots captured a scene of orderly protocol, flags neatly arranged, interpreters stationed nearby, and an air of measured diplomacy prevailing across the hall. At one point, President Lee was seen conversing with Kristalina Georgieva, Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, discussing potential frameworks for regional debt relief and sustainable growth. Nearby, Scott Bessent, representing the private sector delegation, was filmed taking notes during the economic roundtable. China's presence at the summit reflected both confidence and caution. After a year marked by fluctuating trade volumes and lingering post-pandemic adjustments, Xi's outreach to key regional partners suggested a desire to project stability. Shifting trade alignments. The Asia-Pacific region remains one of the most economically dynamic areas in the world, yet tensions have tested the limits of multilateral cooperation. Canada's decision to align with stricter US export controls on sensitive technology and Japan's move to restrict semiconductor materials to China have contributed to a climate of mutual distrust. However, the tone in Gyeongju suggested a recalibration. Xi's meetings indicated a willingness to address disputes through dialogue rather than escalation. For Canada, easing trade friction could benefit domestic industries impacted by Chinese countermeasures. For Japan, restoring diplomatic equilibrium with Beijing may help reduce volatility in regional markets. Analysts note that while no major breakthroughs were achieved, the optics of direct engagement carry weight. After years of suspended dialogues and mutual recriminations, the symbolism of Xi meeting both Carney and Takaichi at the same summit underscores Beijing's effort to rebuild bridges. By the end of the day, the Gyeongju summit had produced no major trade agreements or formal joint statements, yet its significance lay in tone and timing. The brief but constructive encounters between Xi Jinping, Mark Carney, and Sanae Takaichi illustrated a broader recalibration of Asia-Pacific diplomacy. For Beijing, the meetings offered a platform to reassert China's commitment to engagement amid shifting global alignments. For Canada and Japan, they marked early tests of new leadership navigating complex relations with the world's second-largest economy. As the APEC Summit continues through Saturday, discussions will turn to technology cooperation, green financing, and inclusive trade. But the image that will likely endure from Gyeongju is that of cautious re-engagement, a moment where dialogue replaced distance and regional diplomacy found a modest but measurable foothold.